Greetings all, and welcome to the second segment of A Traveler's Guide 2 for Zebes. And today, we'll be continuing a look at the planet with this next segment, A Traveler's Guide to Brinstar. Brinstar was one of the most iconic parts of Zebes, and its name is known far and wide by all that have traveled to the planet. Brinstar was effectively split into three distinct areas by the time the Hunter had arrived there for her final mission on the planet. Old Brinstar constituted the parts of Brinstar that existed during the events of her Zero mission and readily identified by the blue rock that comprised the vast majority of its structure. Thanks to the presence of earthic ore in the area, the cavernous system of Brinstar was once immense and could exist only as a result of the ore's incredibly stable form. Following the events of the Zero mission, however, much of Old Brinstar was destroyed alongside the original Taurian, not to mention the natural habitat of a few unique species native here, and the Zebesian space pirates were forced to rebuild much of the area as they attempted to revive Mother Brain and restart their old conflict with the Galactic Federation. Upper Brinstar's form was a result of the Zebesian space pirates using the bioengineered monster known as Spore Spawn to help control and give life to plants in the otherwise desolate crustal area, creating a thriving jungle ecosystem featuring numerous types of green plants and pink spore-producing plant forms closer to Spore Spawn's domain, while still maintaining the natural biota that once existed in Brinstar before. This feat of ecological good seems odd to have been the result of Zebesian space pirate experimentation, though it is possible that they merely didn't get around to using this tropical environment to create more bioweapons before the Hunter arrived to stop their plans. Finally, Lower Brinstar was comprised of rock that had been stained red by the heat and chemicals that filled the area of Norfair, which lay directly below it. The area's red soil was not the best for growing plants, but was nonetheless home to hardy creatures like the Samus Eater and the numerous rippers that come to feed off the ore in the walls and smaller creatures that fed on it as well. This area effectively became melted into Craigslayer after the Hunter's Zero mission, so in a way it could have been looked at as the new Craigslayer, even though most of its past inhabitants and structures had been weeded out of the local ecosystem of Brinstar, in turn resulting in the extinction of several species that are otherwise endemic to the area. Before we take a good look at the unique biota of this area, it is important to note that, as far as previously covered organisms are concerned, this area was home to the Beatom, Boyon, Dakota, Edikun, Gemer, Key Hunter, Mellow, Rio, Ripper, S-Bug, Scree, Waver, Yapping Maw, Zeb, and Zebo. Now then, let's start our examination of the unique biota that could be found in this land during the events of the Hunter's Zero mission. The members of the Zoomer family are mollusks that are linked together by their shared scavenging habits and semi-shelled bodies. The key member of this family, the Zoomer, is the most common of them all and is distinguished from its brethren by its possession of no less than 12 eyes, all clustered together in the center of its face. The Zoomer excretes a sticky fluid from its feet that enables it to climb walls and even ceilings, making it nearly impossible to really contain them much at all. Thankfully, these creatures are not really a serious threat, as they do not attack or eat live prey. Instead, these creatures possess powerful rock-crushing jaws that allow them to obtain nutrients they need to survive by devouring soil and ore material. These creatures do not have a true brain, but they do have a nerve center right above their mandibles that helps them detect the chemical odors of rocks and soil that have the nutrients they seek. The Zoomer is slightly armored with defensive spikes on its outer shell that can deter minor predators, but it lacks the reinforced shell possessed by its Gemer relatives and is thus easily dispatched with basic weapon fire. This is usually not a major problem, however, as Zoomers do not attack others intentionally, making direct contact with them the only way they can actually hurt someone. It is interesting to note, however, that Zoomers have been notorious in the past for spreading disease, as the Zoomers that existed on Zebes before it was destroyed had spread a deadly flesh-eating bacteria from Talon 4 upon being imported, and with a penchant for rapidly reproducing, it wasn't long before the bacteria destroyed a large portion of the planet's natural biota. Plague aside though, these beasts are not that big of a deal if they are not present in large swarms, and tend to be very non-aggressive and easily dispatched, so they earn an assignment to threat level Alpha. The Disc Giga was a more advanced form of the Sidehopper evolutionary line, and while they possessed the same anatomical variants, anatomical restrictions, hunting tactics, and vulnerability to overhead overblast strikes, though it's usually easier to achieve this by freezing their feet to the floor, they had a single pair of much larger mandibles that have numerous barbs on the legs to make it easier to skewer prey and hold them in place while the monster used their mandibles to rip them apart. Their compound eyes were also much smaller in size, and they tend to be very aggressive, preferring to exist in hot environments as their armored skin made them heat-proof and capable of resisting the scorching temperatures of areas like Norfair. In addition, the Disc Giga had the ability to spit a mucus-like substance from its mouth that could be used to ensnare targets and keep them pinned down while it leapt up to crush them, aiding them immensely in dealing with more agile targets. While these differences aren't enough on their own to make these creatures rank any higher than threat level Beta, they are still much more tougher to handle compared to a normal Sidehopper and are worth approaching with great caution. Zebesian parasites were hardy little creatures that could survive in just about any environment on Zebes and could prove to be a nuisance for those missing the needed protection to repel them. These tiny mites lived in the acid-filled corridors and caves of Brinstar and fed off the life energy of other creatures by sucking their vital fluids out through soft spots of flesh or spaces between armor plates. And despite their size, they could be extremely damaging and even lethal in large swarms, as they are some of the few Zebesian natives able to destroy their barrier-like garner. Not surprisingly, the Zebesian parasite itself was immune to the effects of both acid and lava, as well as its simple form and chemical protected body, which added on yet another hazard beyond the issue of getting into acid and lava alone. Thankfully, though they might have been very good at withstanding the elements, these small creatures would leave their host if it attempted to leave the room they were nesting in, and they could be killed with portable concussive weapons like morph ball bombs. Moreover, when confronted with suits that are too heavily armored for them to get inside or even pierce through, such as the Various suit, they couldn't do much but cling to the targets in vain, leaving them to the mercy of said target, in turn making it very difficult for them to be seen as a serious threat anymore, placing them squarely within threat level Alpha.
That bug there was a great thing if they didn't get blankets, covers, what? Wait, if it's just super dry, I'll come up there and get purple splashes and stuff. Yeah, man, I think that should have gone down exhaust out of the fuel station or something.
The king worm was a rare subterranean creature known to only have occupied the corridors of Brinstar and the planet Zebes while it was still in one piece. The king worm had the appearance of a giant armored worm with a purple body coloration, spikes sticking off the sides of his body, huge mandibles, and a single giant eye on the center of its face. This giant segmented creature was known primarily for its incredible digging abilities, as the monster could use its armored head and massive mandibles to crash through just about any type of rock, either by ramming it head on or crushing it between said mandibles and effectively eating its way through its rocky surroundings, which worked out well for them as they could obtain most of the essential nutrients and minerals they needed in this fashion. When they did not need to feed on flesh, however, king worms could prove to be devastating ambush predators that really didn't have to do much to sneak up on their prey. This is mainly because they could use their enormous bodies to advantage by carving out large holes they plowed through rock to effectively generate living barriers both in front of and behind their prey, logging them between their own body segments. Once their prey had been isolated, king worms would pop their head out of the central cavity on the ceiling and extend their necks rapidly to strike their loitering target with their mandibles, which was strong enough to cut metal and could easily slice a small prey atom in half. If they found their attacks were missing or that their prey was putting up more of a fight than normal, these monsters could also shake the segment of their body to release decaying spikes in the form of shrapnel, hopefully softening up their target or at least distracting it in long enough for them to get a direct hit. The king worm itself might not have been very intelligent, but it was extremely hardy and its armored body was effectively impervious to all forms of conventional weaponry. It did, however, have one big weakness. The king worm's main eye was the only part of its body that was unarmored, and because it only had one to work with, it had to constantly keep its eye open in order to gauge where its prey was, especially after a miss with a direct strike. Beam weapons could not penetrate the eye's thick tissue, but a concussive weapon like a missile could inflict serious trauma on it, and if the eyeball sustained too much damage, it would become detached from its socket, killing the monster instantly. The fact that these monsters are no longer in existence is probably a good thing, but they were nonetheless one of the more destructive predators on the planet, and probably would have been exterminated in time anyways if Zebes had not been destroyed. It is lastly noted that these creatures had a habit of picking up chosen artifacts as they burrowed, so for the few that did manage to kill one was likely to find something beneficial in their death, most commonly in the form of a charge beam upgrade. Still, they definitely could be tricky to handle on fear alone, and rightfully belong in threat level beta.
You ever rob one of these monsters? I tell you, it ain't everyone's picnic, no siree. Bastards rough on the legs, sparks everywhere, it's like sitting on a fucking cack-attack. Ain't no padding either, our body makes it way too easy to just slip off the damn thing, and that ain't fun if you're stuck in a tunnel at that moment. But it's not all doom and gloom. These shitting spikes can make for a great additive for broth, I'd imagine, given that they're shitting off a lot of organic matter. Simulation or not though, I don't exactly like the idea of staring one in the face, cause there is no question of whether or not it understands you're looking at it, cause it definitely is looking at you.
And now, let's expand that biota and include the entities that can be found here before the end of Zebes entirely. The members of the Sidehopper family were all alike in that they were insectoids that possessed a single pair of enlarged legs that are used for the purpose of locomotion and attack. The Sidehopper itself came in a variety of different sizes and colors, but they're all classified as the same creature as it had the exact same anatomy. The main body of the Sidehopper was adorned with a single massive pair of compound eyes that allowed it to effectively see everything around in its environment, a small abdomen where the majority of its internal organs were stored, and twin pairs of sharp mandibles, with the Sidehoppers being the only family member with more than one set, on the bottom of their body that they use to rip their prey apart. What really made these creatures stand out, however, was their disproportionately large legs, which had evolved in order to take advantage of the otherwise odd anatomy. Because their bodies were fixed as a single piece and they could not move their mouths much, sidehoppers evolved a single pair of massive legs, each with a knee joint that could be rotated 90 degrees from a horizontal to vertical state. The actual feet of the creatures were heavily armored and possessed elastic tissue on the inside adjacent to the base of their claws. This allowed these creatures to store massive amounts of kinetic energy in their feet as potential energy that was then released when they jumped, causing them to soar high into the air before coming back down to the ground in a fearsome stomp that could potentially generate shockwaves capable of knocking over larger enemies and deliver enough of an impact to easily crush the bodies of smaller creatures, allowing the monsters to then feed on the scraps of their carcasses within range of their mouths. Thankfully, most of the younger specimens and the larger adults were weak to standard weapon fire and could not take much in the way of punishment, especially if they were hit from above with an overblast. Nonetheless, these monsters could deliver a heck of a wallop with their powerful stomps and can deal some serious damage to explorers if they didn't have strong armor for protection, and combined with a noble durability, it more than makes them perfect for classification within threat level beta. Metaries were a close relative to the scree and had the same basic anatomy, but they were far more dangerous than their relatives as the wings were much larger and coated in a thick layer of organic metal. As such, these creatures could not be damaged by normal beam weapons if attacked on the side, only receiving damage from weapons like super missiles or the screw attack, though they could still be hurt normally if the soft body was targeted. These monsters did not self-destruct when they hit the ground, and they could travel much faster than the scree and fling large amounts of rocky shrapnel when they hit the ground and started to drill into it, making them a viable hazard when relatively close to them. As such, they tend to be best struck within threat level beta and were best avoided if one did not have the firepower to handle them directly. The fire flea was a small insectoid that is usually treated as more of a help than a hindrance, and could be of great use as long as one did not unintentionally come into contact with them. These small creatures were similar to other glowworm-like insectoids located on the fringes of the Milky Way galaxy, in that they had the ability to use bioluminescence to communicate with each other through fluctuating pulses, but they were otherwise surprisingly small relative to the size of the light they produced. This was mainly because the head and thorax of the creatures were incredibly small and the wings were just barely usable, their swollen abdomen being at least twice as large as the rest of their body combined. These beasts fed on small bits of organic matter that floated up into the air in dank caverns and tended to travel in swarms for protection, though they were careful not to be too close to one another so the lights didn't blind another nearby member of the species, creating a movement pattern that often completely and utterly illuminated an otherwise lightless cavern. However, the fire flea was a very delicate creature as its body contained volatile gases that are used to help it hover in the air. If this creature made any hard direct contact with another life form or surface, the shock could be enough to ignite these gases, creating a small explosion in the process that only inflicted contact damage but also killed the fire flea at the same time. As a result, it would be advised that one keep the distance from these beasts, as the destruction of just a few could significantly lower the visibility of an area and in turn make it harder to react to an oncoming obstacle that may otherwise not be visible in the murky darkness, anchoring them within threat level alpha. The Cacatac was an interesting plant form that more than proved that cactus-like creatures could survive in more than just arid environments when needed. This monster was primarily named out of resemblance to earth cactuses, but while they might look similar, they were much more different in terms of behavior than they were alike. Unlike earth cacti, the Cacatac was a predatory plant that used its body as its primary means of hunting prey, usually by blasting off hardened spines to the upper surface of its body in order to impale other creatures. Cacatacs were not very fast, as their feet like root extensions could only allow them to crawl on the ground about as fast as an average human could walk when moving at full speed, the spines adorning their outer frames mainly being there in case an attacker tried to get too close to their tender body. Cacatacs would usually release a powerful attractive aroma from the flower on their bodies, which is not a real flower and therefore will never wilt away, in order to entice other creatures to come near them. When the Cacatac feels that it is being severely threatened, or if it detects the chemical aroma of another living organism that may have been edible, they would forcefully pump stored water into a series of tiny shafts that connected the inside of their body with the spines on their exterior. As soon as the pressure became too much to handle, the attached needles would be fired off as projectiles in all directions. The Cacatac would continue to do this until it no longer smelled the life form in the room anymore. At that point, it would wait for the smell of decay to set in, and then follow it to its target, where it could then extend the jaws hidden under its body to feed on the carrion as long as it wished to. Cacatacs were not resilient against damage, and could thus be easy to hurt, but they nonetheless were noted as being one of the most prolific creatures to have ever lived in the confines of Zebes, as the creatures showed an astonishing capacity to adapt to just about any type of environment, with their body and flower color changing in response to each of these miniature worlds, though their latent abilities and powers remained the same, and thus marked them as a common but nonetheless simple creature to eliminate when needed, making them perfect for a place in threat level beta. The Samus Eater and its buds might have possessed a strange name that did not really belong in scientific classification, but their namesake nonetheless demonstrated the type of pain they are able to inflict. And it seems that it's not enough to get yelled at by the rest of the crew here. Fantastic! These giant flowers start off as small buds that grew in a series of thick central vines where they hung and slowly absorbed energy stolen from nearby plants. In their bud state, these plants were unable to process solid foods for energy, so they tended to stay curled up and supported their adult brethren by firing explosive spore pods of potential prey that could both inflict harm on nearby creatures, hopefully knocking them into a Samus Eater flower, and potentially scare the spores to a new area where a fresh member of the species could begin its life. The adult Samus Eater possessed a large red-tinted flower that was designed very much like the blob thrower of SR-388, and may in fact have been distantly related. These creatures could not use any major lure of their own to attract creatures aside from an uplifting smell, but this worked fine for them as the major vines they grew from could still sap the nutrients from other plants to make up for a lack of nutrition. Once a creature accidentally fell into the stamen of one of these flowers, the stamen would retract to reveal that it is a fake lure, the center instead acting as a mouth with sharp teeth that the plant would then use to chop its prey to pieces before swallowing them and processing them for energy. Despite this green power, however, there were still some things these plants could not digest, and metal was their primary issue. As such, while they would attack and try to eat a prey that was, well, encased in a suit of sorts, they would only munch on them for a bit before opening their mouths and allowing the creature within to escape, just as long as it did not hurt their digestive organs anymore. It is also known that these flowers would occasionally form a symbiotic relationship with yapping moths in order to maximize the amount of prey they could feed on, and since the Samus Eater was able to directly attack and consume anything to begin with, this more than proved to be a perfect arrangement for the two, as the flower merely had to sacrifice use of its mouth to make the union work. While it can be said for certain that these flowers were quite vibrant and gorgeous to look at, the real danger that they posed could nonetheless make them a nightmare to deal with without armor, making them more than fit for threat level beta. Giga were small, bee-like insectoids that made the home of the interior workings and pipe systems of Brinstar prior to the destruction of Zebes. These simple insectoids possessed an exaggerated fly-like body with small delicate wings, a disproportionately large head, a massive horn, and large fangs that stuck out of their mouth. They were armed with compound eyes that allowed them to detect the slightest motion near them, which also serves their primary means of hunting alongside their antennae, which could read chemical vapors in the air. These creatures fed off of smaller, more insignificant insectoids by quietly flying near them and striking them with their fangs, though they had been also known to feed on the fungus that occasionally grows in the more biologically diverse sections of the region of Starving, generally by flinging themselves full force at the target with their mouths wide open. Up until the destruction with the end of Zebes, these creatures, along with other insectoid beasts of a similar size, had created massive heights beneath the surface of the planet and occupied more space of the planet's interior than almost any other type of organism. Most of the time, these creatures would remain in the ground and not bother other life forms, but when they had the urge to feed or otherwise had to leave their homes to find food, they did not dig their own tunnels. Instead, they vomited large volumes of stomach acid to slowly corrode passageways into the air holes that led to the surface. Once a hole was made, these creatures could freely fly in and out of the air holes to the surface where there is plentiful food, returning only after getting their fill or forced to escape a large predator. As far as monsters go, these creatures were very weak and could usually only sustain a shot or two from a basic weapon, but they still could fly quite fast, and their sharp teeth made it a bad idea to get in their way, especially since they were known to be immune to the effects of acid, and thus sometimes made their nests in acid-drenched holes, and the force of their blow has a habit of knocking others into hazards that may be more dangerous than the creatures themselves, in turn occupying a solid niche in threat level alpha. The Zelo was a soft-shelled mollusk known for being able to survive in the acid-drenched areas of the planet Zebes, and for being among the more creepy-looking creatures to ever live on the planet. These creatures possess no bones or internal support at all, with the soft shell being the only thing keeping them from being an easy meal. Even then though, the shell wasn't that effective, as it was only made from a thin layer of hardened outer flesh and was thus easily pierced and harmed by conventional weapons. These creatures possess 3 pairs of insect-like legs that excrete a sticky substance that enabled them to climb up walls and even ceilings, which seemed to work for them just fine as they fed on small microorganisms that lived on the walls and ceilings of the areas they called home. The most noticeable feature of their anatomy, however, were their enormous eyes, which stuck out of their shell strongly and were in fact the largest organ of their entire body. It is unknown why exactly their eyes were so large, but it is speculated that it might simply be a mutation that was brought on by living in highly acidic environments, or as a means of detecting predators from afar, which makes some sense as these creatures were very slow moving. There are several different varieties of these creatures, and all were fairly docile and would not harm others intentionally, though it has been documented that a rare red variety had the ability to fill its eyes with a potent gas and life, and once it died, its eyes would fall off and ignite as its blood was exposed to the air, causing them to create a damaging explosion if they came into contact with an attacker. Despite this nasty sort of defensive trick, the Zila otherwise were pretty easy for explorers to move past and would rarely put up a fight against sufficient firepower, lying them within threat level alpha for the most part. As noted already, the members of the key hunter family represented a surprisingly intelligent race of insects that originally came to Zebes from an unknown point of origin, meaning that they may still be extinct unlike most of the creatures that lived on Zebes, and while it may never be known exactly where they came from, their loyalty to the space pirates nonetheless made them a serious threat. Specifically here though, key hunters began life primarily as Zeros, which were slug-like caterpillars that possessed a segmented body and few discernible features aside from eyes in some specimens. Their natural body color could vary depending upon the type of key hunter they'd eventually grow up to, but in most cases, they were fairly soft-bodied with only small spines to the body for defense, and could be killed with basic weaponry without much of a problem. As such, they are really then only fit for threat level alpha on Zebes, and could be mostly ignored otherwise until after maturation. The Spore Spawn was a plant bioweapon engineered by the Zebesian space pirates to act as a guardian for some of the heavy-duty artillery and a creature that could effectively control all of the plant life in Brinstar. Though its influence has seemingly benefited the place and had restored large portions of the area to a tropical environment that had not existed in Brinstar for centuries. The Spore Spawn itself consisted of an enormous barred pod attached to a central room through a flexible stem strong enough to pull the massive pod up and down around the room freely. In the upper nooks and crannies of its main containment room, there are spore pods that were under the direct control of the creature that could launch explosive spore nodules as a defense. These nodules were not that damaging themselves and could be easily destroyed with regular gunfire, but the fact there are a lot of them did not make it any easier to avoid them. Moreover, as the hunter came to learn, the creature's main body was the real problem, as it could slowly swing its pod back and forth like a giant club in a figure-8 pattern in order to destroy its attackers. Despite the limited intelligence of the plant, it is more than a tough nut to crack and was effectively immune to all forms of direct damage when closed, but the monster could sadly not keep its body closed for long. As a result of radical mutation, the plant was unable to properly regulate its internal temperature, and in forcing itself up and down along the ground and wall, the plant generated a lot of internal heat that was trapped in the interior of its main pod. In order to keep itself from overheating, the plant needed to open its pod to release the excess internal heat, revealing a glowing red core that was susceptible to charged shots and missiles that the hunter took full advantage of in turn. As the spore spawn continued to take damage, its color darkened and began to move increasingly fast as it became agitated, but it was not too long before the plant could take no more and closed its pod for the last time, hardening and withering away into a dusty rock of dead matter. Thankfully for the rest of life in Brinstar, the plant's death did not trigger the death of the jungle environments that had taken root in the once desolate land, though the small relief was rendered a bit of a moot point as a result of the total destruction of Zebes in the ensuing hours. Overall, for a simple plant that had been bioengineered into a makeshift weapon, it honestly proved to be a tough nut to literally crack open and destroy, and deserving of a spot within threat level Gamma for its unique defensive attributes.
Ah yes, what a fascinating creature to me, I would say. While plant-based bioweapons tend to be a bit limited in terms of what can be done with them because of their biological needs, they can still have their uses, and this monster's capacity to quite literally terraform the underground reaches of a planet more than made it possible to use Brinstar as a place to grow food supplies with little issue. While it might not have been the most intelligent of bioweapons, it didn't need to be, and as a whole, I would say that it was a total success. Minus the pollen that it could produce. Makes me glad I don't have any allergies. I once saw a trooper sneeze so hard from exposure that they hopped up part of the digestive system. Upon reflection, I might need to look into that more for future experiments.
Brinstar is one of the few locations on Zebes that got to enjoy two entirely different lives over the course of its existence, and while the biota of both was relatively similar in many respects, it nonetheless proved to be a unique obstacle for travelers to behold. Originally, its rough, unforgiving hard terrain made it difficult to traverse on its own because of the stone that comprised much of its layout, sharp and jagged and unfair for those that tried to work through it without some form of protective armor suit to ward it off, and the denizens of the cavernous depths. On the other hand, its more recent existence as a plant-filled paradise made it less rough as far as terrain goes, but the sheer amount of pollen and spores filling its air could make many species choke if they didn't have a respirator of some sort to help them breathe within it. Either way, the local biota was certainly not among the most dangerous of beasts in many cases, so there could be a break of sorts seen there. Regardless, Brinstar was still one of the safer locations for explorers to examine, and while it might not have been a picnic for everyone, it was a fairly safe location for travelers to examine, so long as they had a good tour guide and can keep away from the acid pools that dwelled in its lowest depths. After that long trek through both stony tough terrain and more plants than the greenhouse could ever handle, some might be wanting to take a break to try and take in what little comfort could be found there. But we've only just begun to dig into the surface of Zebes here. Next up, we are going to be going even deeper into the toxic liquids that fill the realm's lowest reaches. So buckle up, because next time we are going to be traveling into the acid-drenched lower layers of Brinstar, as we take a journey through the caustic environment simply known as Kraid's Lair. Thank you for reaching the end of this presentation. While we might not always get along, the Space Pirates and myself, in whatever capacity we can manage, are dedicated to analyzing and examining the life forms of many different worlds, extant and extinct, to show the great variety of life that exists out within the greater cosmos. If you enjoyed this info video and would like to see more, please like, comment, and subscribe for more information. We'll do our best to keep pumping out data so the greater public has an understanding of what to expect when exploring alien planets and their denizens. With that, have a safe journey, and have your bribes prepared beforehand if you happen to come near our territory.